I wanted to stress that seeing this book in a PDF format is challenging because there's so much going on, and it's a new wave of weirdness, underground comics influence, a new wave of weirdness, and I don't know if some critics are a little harsh on the new kid on the block. It takes a while to accept new weirdness. Just relax on the beach with a seagull and read it, and it makes all the difference in the world. And this is humans and gods, and there's some scatological moments, and there's some nudity. There's even a page with an orgy, but that doesn't happen that much. That's not the main thing going on in this book. It's just like everything's possible when you've got gods involved, gods and humans. And so yeah, and I'm going to interview the creator of All the Things I Know. Everything's in that title, All the Things I Know. So let's go to it. This is Henry Chamberlain. Welcome to another edition of Comics Grinder. It's my pleasure to share with you some time chatting with Zebadiah Keneally. We're going to talk about All the Things I Know. And this is his debut graphic novel, many years in the making. Thanks so much for doing this chat with me, Zebadiah.
Henry, it's my pleasure. I feel I'm like honored that you'd like to talk about my book. It's really cool.
Well, great. And I have another camera so we can look at a few pages and chat about those directly. I guess I wanted to start in a kind of like just an off-kilter manner a little bit. There's that Detective Lovebeard.
Yep.
And I'm curious what his story is as far as how you created him. I had talked to you before, well, emailed you about some of the challenges with seeing a book of this scope as a PDF, and there's so many details, things can get lost. I swear to you, I didn't really fixate or zero in on the Lovebeard until I had the printed edition, if that makes any sense. I mean, of course I saw it, but I didn't see it. Can you say something about the Detective Lovebeard?
Interesting. Absolutely. So the way that character was created was unique among the characters in the book. So I studied printmaking as an undergraduate, and when I moved to New York City, I got involved in a community print studio, and I was playing around there at one point, and I made this Shinkalei image of these two heart-shaped beards with sunglasses, and for some reason that image really stuck with me. I had already had the idea for some of the characters in this story and was just mashing things together. And part of my vision with the Pittsburgh Cat character involved this crime that's committed early on in the book, and Lovebeard became the clear choice in my mind for the person pursuing Pittsburgh Cat. But what the character really represents is this worship of logic and reason. I was really, I kind of grew up to intellectual parents, and there was this veneration of that worldview and mindset, and I really wanted to explore like what that outlook would be if it were kind of pushed to the extreme and hitting a breaking point. Does that make sense? Is that clear?
Yes, it is. I guess I would tell readers if I end up transcribing this and listeners that I kind of threw you into the deep end of the pool by throwing such an esoteric question. And But it's a great answer because it gives people a taste of the artistic process. And it's not always that I have somebody who's an artist in a deep way, plus a cartoonist. So I love the answer. Let me give you a more conventional question. Let's say that this is a grand opening of an art show and you have some passersby that casually gravitate towards you. How would you describe all the things I know to somebody completely new to it?
All the things my elevator pitch goes something like this. All the things I know is the story of an evil villain bent on world domination and mind control who goes by the name of Hamburger Vampire. He's a snake oil salesman and capitalist par excellence. His attempts to control the world are foiled by none other than God. He gets resentful and hires Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto out of retirement in Hades to help him kidnap God so that he can control the world. Meanwhile, a failed artist and down-and-out drug addict, Pittsburgh Cat, bottoms out on the beach in Miami. After accidentally killing a motel proprietor, he is pursued by Miami's most revered detective, Lovebeard. Pittsburgh Cat meets God on the beach. God takes Pittsburgh Cat through a wormhole right in front of the detective's eyes, and the detective's worldview begins to crumble as he pursues Pittsburgh Cat through mystic circumstances. They end up meeting Laura the librarian, and together they team up to save the world from Hamburger Vampire.
I love that. That's definitely an elevator pitch. I think you had more fun with the first question because I know it's.
I was performing with that second one. I'm like, all right, I'm on camera. This is recording. I've given it and botched it so many times that it was on.
Well, that's marketing for you, and you have to do it too. I mean, you don't want the artists always be self-deprecating and to go in detours. You have to sell your work too. Of course, and you want people to know about your book. But I don't want to digress too much. I want to share some pages of this amazing book. There's so much to say about how to go into the book. And I'll ask you a more going back to the deep end of the pool question in a sec, but let's try this. All right. Okay, Zebadiah, we're just going to play around with visiting the book, different pages. You bring a beautiful God into this scatological stuff going, and that kind of like threw me off at first because this is such a busy book, like I was saying, and you just need to sit down and enjoy it. I do a little mini intro to this interview where I'm sitting on the beach. I think that's like an ideal place, or in a cafe or wherever, but just relax and zone in with the book, and the book will lay out its treats for you. And I'll just be quiet for a second. This is Hamburger Vampire, of course, and this is a lovely page. They're all so meticulously put together. How long does it take you to do a typical page?
So a page like the spread you have open now, each page took probably 4 or 5 hours, especially that right page with the pharmaceutical factory and the doctor's handwriting a prescription. That was a very involved drawing. As a matter of fact, the timeline on the creation of this book is non-linear, and these pages I drew in 2016. And at the time, I was drawing a lot on my commute to and from work. So most of these 2 pages were drawn on the New York City subway.
Oh, wow. Well, I love knowing that. How big are these pages?
So they're just original, a little bit larger than they are in the book. It's what was it? 28 by 19 centimeters. So it's roughly 7 by 10, 10 by 7 inches.
So I'm imagining you drawing on the subway, which is so. I would love to be doing that for a graphic novel. Just go ahead and it's so direct. What type of pen would you use when you're doing this on the subway?
I drew these with a Micron number 8 pen. Um,
Well,
Sakura.
yeah, a lot of folks will relate to that right away. And there's Pittsburgh Cat, and this is one of the scenes that I focused in on my review on the Comix Journal, which I thought was a pretty good example of the loopiness, the vibe of the book, and
It's
all this busyness and it's busy, but it depicts clutter, but the image is very clean, if that makes sense.
yeah, even though I went to art school in a lot of ways, I taught myself to draw. So I threw out a lot of the rules of figure ground relationship uh in the way I taught myself. So everything is in focus. I don't really draw in such a way that will lower the contrast in the middle ground or background, and if everything is crystal clear. When I see these scenes, when I imagine them in my mind, I do imagine every single little detail, um, which can make them feel a little overwhelming to kind of surrender to. Um, but it feels very honest as to how this stuff exists within me. And there's one thing I'd love to say now, after you pointed out that scene of Pittsburgh Cat rolling through the landscape, and his, you know, intervention with God on that cliff that begins that process.
Yeah,
This scene came to me in a dream. It was a Technicolor cartoon dream. Um, one of the only ones of those I've ever had. I woke up in the middle of the night, kind of stunned. And this is how Pittsburgh Cat was introduced to me. Um, this, these panels happened. This is a recording of my dream. And at the end of the dream, after he lands on the beach in Miami, this logo screen came up in the dream, and it said Pittsburgh Cat, and it had his face. And it's just sort of this pulsating bubble letters. And I asked myself, who's Pittsburgh Cat? What's happening here? And then kind of actively began to imagine where the story went from there.
it's leading up to something. Oh, here we go. This is a nice touch that I would not have really noticed in a PDF. I mean, I would see it and yet not see it. These little touches, the repetition, there's patterns running throughout the book. That their eyeballs or these pointing fingers. Hamburger Vampire's pointing at the elevator. He's also pointing at the corporate woman. Is there something you could say about composing a scene like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up watching Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry and those sort of classic cartoons, and there'll be emphasized moments where a character's eyes will jump out of their head, or they'll take off running, and their first few steps they're kind of moving in place before they move through space. And I always loved that effect. And I feel like my I I honestly don't feel like a good enough draftsman to render that stuff the way those artists did, or the way I see other artists render motion with their characters. But I still wanted to kind of capture that essence. And when I was composing that page in particular that you pointed out, it was uh, an essential like plot development point, but visually, like it didn't have as much juice or complexity or detail as some of the other pages. So once I got the essential information down and was looking at the page, I thought, well, it needs something more. It needs a little bit of motion and energy. And, so I'll often employ like a technique like that, like repeating the pointing finger to add some excitement to what I otherwise think of as like a stiff panel.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I love this close up of the fingers. It finally pushes 44. Of course, the dope vape. It's not just the hipsters. Everyone, even the mayors, is hooked on dope vape. So yeah, a lot just yeah, you really hit on the heart and soul of what can go wrong for a city dweller, specifically New York. Of course, here's everyone like a scene from Thriller, hooked on dope vape.
Well, there was some years ago in Brooklyn, the street drug bath salts got really popular.
Oh my God.
And there's a kind of notoriously hectic subway transfer point in Brooklyn called Myrtle Broadway. And at the peak of the bath salts epidemic, there were addict zombies just kind of lining the streets. And, I think bath salts sort of had the effect of kind of paralyzing people, similar to someone who's nodding out on heroin. And anyway, it was a pretty horrific sight, but it just, it's one of those truth is stranger than fiction moments
Yeah.
that captured my imagination and pointed out like the kind of desperation that's like prevalent in the culture, the need to escape from all the different kinds of pressures that exist at this moment in time. And it seemed like a really important way to underscore like conceptually what I wanted dope vape to represent in this story.
But that's a very all your answers are very impressive. I'm sure artists and people in general will appreciate that. I'm going to ask you what my going back to the deep end of the pool question now. Well, okay, what I've observed from a lot of comics critics is that they embrace a certain kind of weirdness. Like everyone will bow down to say Gary Panther, not that he doesn't deserve it, but for the new kid on the block, they're going to be harsher or distanced. Are you experiencing that, or do you sense that as something that you have to tackle?
I mean, if and I hope this doesn't come across the wrong way, but like and it was in is that what I it's a tough question for me to answer. I immediately thought about your comment about the scatological God and like that particular scene had been inspired by a portion of Carl Jung's autobiography that he relays this like horribly offensive dream where he dreamt God defecating on a cathedral in Zurich or something, and how that for him began his trajectory as the eminent psychologist. And so and his thinking has influenced me a lot, so it was important for me to make a nod there. So in that in that sense, I do feel like I have experienced a little bit of that kind of um, tougher eye. And then on the other hand, um, I feel very much like an outsider in the comics world, um, because I've come into it from a fine art angle. When this project kind of announced itself to me, it was uh, challenged my sense of who I was a little bit, and I haven't. I haven't felt like, aside from your review in the Comics Journal, it's really been noticed at all in the comics community at large. And part of that, I think, is my own, uh, just sort of, what's the word? I don't know. I don't know if I feel like a real part of that community at this point. Um, yeah.
Well, I had to ask because yeah, I'm happy to be taken to task with my review. I I think I might be onto something that it's hard for some people to accept the new weird because you're not that your stuff is quote unquote just weird, but it is the new it's something new, the new kid on the block. So I'm telling you, it was handed to me as a PDF, and like I've said too much now. I wasn't sure what to make of it at first, and then thankfully to gotten the printed copy, I can thoroughly enjoy it and I really appreciate it.
Oh, that's really, really, really nice to hear. Thank you, Henry.
Oh well, definitely. I wanted to say something about how you handle the human figure, and it's all very artfully done, very beautifully done. Were you at a crossroads when it came time to decide, am I going to have the gods be be naked and that's that, or
Um, I was a little bit, uh, so one of the it honestly wasn't ever a question for me.
there you
I
go.
guess I and I I felt like, what do I feel like? I'm not sure if I have an answer for that question. You're making me think, which is uh so it's a good uncomfortable. Um I didn't really comprehend. Well, that's not entirely true. I wrote a script for this book first, and the script is, more pages than the graphic novel. And the gods figured large into that script. And at one point, towards the end of it, or when I was, when a colleague was helping me edit it to start before I started drawing in earnest, I thought, like, oh, I'm gonna have to draw these guys naked a lot. Um, and um, I don't know though. I've always been taken by the human form, and loved, um, figure drawing when I was in my 20s, and um, was kind of obsessed with rendering bodies in strong line, even all those years ago. And there's something like, primal and unabashed about how the gods behave and conduct themselves, that they're, uh, full frontal nudity like corroborates.
Yes, yes, I was just waiting for you to finish your thought. I wholeheartedly agree. I think more artists should embrace using the human form, and you just draw so well. I mean, yeah, I was thinking of Mary Fleener for a moment, but I think I shouldn't be putting people on different levels, but I think your work is just up there, or even I don't know, a new generation, Mary Fleener. Yours is your own thing, and it's so well done. I don't think I can emphasize that enough. I'll just show a few more pages. We basically got through the hard stuff, Zebediah. I'm reaching the wrapping up stage. I just don't want to miss anything. But here's another example of the hyper detail, which is so much fun. But all drawing every single book.
There are it's really nice to hear you point that out. Um, I appreciate that. I look at other artists who draw, and I often admire their ability to edit things out and leave out details. And I've been in some of my other drawings, I've been trying to do that and learn how to embrace the less is more approach, but it just never feels right to me. I think my heart, I'm a maximalist.
Yeah, you're not overthinking it. That's just your natural way of tackling things. Some pages are a little more stripped down, and others are more hyper detailed, but it all just fits in so well. Did you ever feel like, oh, is this all of this going to come together since it was so many years in the making, or did you just have a certain rhythm?
So, I mean, for years, I wondered if the whole thing would come together. Um, I began working on the story and like in the first draft um, around 2009 or 2010, and I didn't make it very far. And then a few years later, in 2012, I really spent some time working on this story, and I drew in a much looser, more gestural way, 450 pages, and I was trying to tell the story just through drawing without any writing or outline, and I hadn't um, I know now hadn't had enough experience to finish telling the story and to let the characters go where they needed to go, but after a certain point I couldn't um, I just felt like I had begun weaving this carpet and there were threads everywhere, and I was just tied in a big knot in them and I couldn't go on. And then I began drawing and I abandoned that version. I began drawing again a couple years later in 2016, and and was doing these very detailed, time-consuming drawings and found that I couldn't, and again, without a script or an outline, just drawing to tell the story. And I found that the pace that it took me to draw these things prevented me from developing the story, and I put the project aside again. But it wouldn't leave me alone. And when the pandemic hit and lockdown began, I said, well, now's the time to write this script. I know I have to write this script, and then I can use it to guide the drawings. And I began that process, um, and then I had enough drawings from the 2016 version that I was able to pitch the project to Apartamento, and they surprisingly picked it up. And I had the opportunity to just work through the script and translate it into drawings, which was a total task. And I was at many points during that process uncertain about my ability to get everything I needed to into the drawings to cover the ground I had laid out in words. And it was I had to do editing and drop plenty of scenes and secondary or tertiary plot lines that I really felt attached to in order to just sort of bring this thing to completion. And it was an overwhelming task. I wasn't sure I'd be able to do it until it was done. And then I was stunned that I had made it.
Well, it's well deserved that this book is out there. I am going to try to get back to where I was to begin with. Here we go. I'd invite people to check out your website, Hamburger Vampire, and I noticed when I looked at your artist statement that Hamburger Vampire has quite a long history. He's been like this recurring character. Is there something you could tell us about how the Hamburger Vampire came to be?
Yeah. I moved to New York City I guess in 2009, and I got a job delivering mail at Goldman Sachs. I had graduated from college right before the recession that hit at that time, and so it was work was hard to come by for a bit. And then I find myself in this bank that had a huge role in this financial crisis, and I felt like I was working in the gates of hell to some extent. Um, I would hide out in a janitor's closet on the 26th floor and draw when it was slow in the mailroom. And on one of those occasions, I was just reassociating, and there before me on the page was a hamburger with a lettuce mustache and vampire fangs. And I looked at it and I said, "Oh, that's Hamburger Vampire." And he immediately became an evil entrepreneur. Just like kind of greed and self-serving desire to the max. I really wanted to like imagine what that would look like in an individual who just had no compunction about running roughshod over anyone to get their way. And so that must have been around 2010, where Hamburger 9 or 10, when Hamburger Vampire was served to me on this platter. And from the jump, his characteristics I always imagined were related to Donald Trump. So like that kind of gregarious, like mafioso con man, with a lot of power.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you a couple more questions. I hate to I'm just so much enjoying this conversation. I wanted to ask you a little bit about Apartamento. So I saw a lot of wonderful illustrations you've done over the years with them. And then did you just approach them? Hey guys, what do you think about doing a graphic novel, or how did that come about?
It came about really naturally. It was so they were there was someone I had been interested in for years, and I had made a zine with a publisher out of Zurich called Neves Books, and through that I got introduced to the executive editor. I may have botched his title, Robbie Whitehead at Apartamento, and Robbie sometime later asked me to illustrate their annual cookbook, which they do as a fundraiser for a cancer foundation in Barcelona. And and I kind of brought I was so excited about the opportunity. I brought like everything I had to that project, and um, they did an interview with me over Zoom to promote that cookbook. And they had, Googled me and done a deep dive and seen all the wacky and wild things I had done up to that point. So they wanted to know about me as an artist, and there was no way for me to talk about that without including Hamburger Vampire, who's a character that I've done a lot of videos and performances as over the years as well. And at the end of that conversation, after having just talked about how essential Hamburger Vampire has been to my creative process, um, I asked them if they, I told them that I'd been working on this graphic novel, and I asked them if they knew anyone who might be interested, thinking that they would not be interested because they are an interiors magazine and publish a lot of architectural books. And they surprised me by saying, we publish books, like we're interested. And and that began the conversation. It took some time from there for Robbie to convince everyone at that organization that this was a worthwhile project, but he was able to do that, um, and here we are.
Well, that's very exciting, and of course, this is their first graphic novel, so they're in a new territory.
It
And
is. It is. Yeah.
word of mouth has magical ways of bringing things together. So I wanted to ask you about the gallery scene a little bit, since you're a fine artist as well as an illustrator. Uh, is there any sense of being in a gallery show that you could share with folks, with aspiring cartoonists who also want to show their work in a gallery?
Sure. Are you asking me to describe the experience or describe
Yeah.
my experience of like getting artworks into a gallery?
Well, I was looking at your website, and I saw some really mind-blowing presentation installation work for Go Naked, I believe it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so I I think like what's been um essential for me is just um getting involved in communities of artists. When I was younger, it was a community of artists around the Robert Blackburn printmaking workshop in Manhattan. And from there, I met some folks who were doing independent risograph publishing, and I got to collaborate with them. And they would put on exhibitions, and I performed at a bunch of those. And meanwhile, I would go to lots of gallery openings, of people that I knew from the print shop or from college or who I met at a party. And I just go and show up to their openings and be there and talk to people and make friends, visit their studios, invite them to my studio. And from there, I just built a bunch of connections with people who are doing creative things. And the opportunities to show in galleries grew out of those friendships and connections. Jacqueline, who runs Good Naked, is really wonderful. She saw my work on Instagram, and she had um, been she had made a decision to start a gallery at that point, and So she DM'd me and asked if she could come visit the studio. And she came over, and I showed her some drawings that ended up in this book, and among other things. And we just had a conversation, and found that like uh, we had similar values and cared about similar things with regards to art, and just kind of trying to focus on being genuine and playful and with a little bit of an entertainment bent to it. Um, and she invited me to paint a mural in her gallery, and um, I had been trying, and that gave me an opportunity to scale up and take what, most of my drawings are pretty intimate, 8.5 by 11 or 10 by 7. And it was really exciting to go big and have, a wall. And it was a challenge that, because, I hang around with artists some of whom make paintings. I had been making paintings and trying to figure out how to make the drawings larger. And there was a natural progression there. And all the, yeah. yeah, yeah, that's
That's a very, very generous answer. I think I know people will appreciate that are trying to get a foot in the door. Uh, it's an organic process, and it certainly doesn't hurt to be there, be part of the scene, and things just naturally take place.
I think yeah, it's important to make friends and connect. And it's a scary thing. Like, um, it's vulnerable to walk into a gallery full of people you don't know. And I've kind of had stifling social anxiety in spaces like that plenty of times. But I've found that as long as as long as I'm willing to like keep trying, I'll find the people um, uh, who I resonate with, and there's some spaces where, we're just on different wavelengths, and that's not this is easier in theory and practice to like not take that personally and to just continue on. But that's really what it comes down to. It's just that if I keep looking for the folks who have the same values as I do, I'll find them. But if I stop, then I can't find them.
Exactly. That's a very valuable piece of advice, because I've heard that in different industries. It's almost like a code. A person who is trying to let you down easy will say, "Well, we have these values," and you're thinking, "Well, maybe those aren't the same values. Are we not? We're not talking the same values here. Okay, so just let that go." But you do have to have something of a somewhat thick skin, because artists, by their very nature, are sensitive people. And there's nothing that's you want to be that is part of you. Don't feel bad about being sensitive. But when you experience rejection, just remember, oh yeah, I'm a sensitive person. I might take this kind of harshly, but you'll get over it. Because some galleries that it doesn't fill their need, and it's just a bottom line thing.
Absolutely. And galleries are businesses. They want to sell artworks, and you know it means a lot to me that you appreciate my weirdness, because there's definitely been galleries that don't, or gallerists that have told me, um, you really should make work that make people feel better. Like your stuff it's too dark. Like I can't sell this. And that, I don't forget comments like that, but um, I think to your point about artists being sensitive, like the sensitive artist puts a lot of themselves into their work, and like if I'm like kind of living in integrity, and being honest about who I am in my work, like that's what makes something relatable. If I'm like lying about who I am in my work, that energy is there in the final product, and we are intelligent beings. We're like we're all smart and sensitive and reading on multiple levels all the time. That information will be in there, and it's I just that feels kind of soulless to me.
That's a perfect place to put a dot on it, and to end it, unless you have something else you wanted to add, because I can't help it if somebody has limited experience with art. Hey, that's okay. So you're rejecting my art because you don't realize the potential of it, or whatever. It's like it becomes a big whatever. Okay, we have to just move on at some point.
Yeah, yeah. I think I could babble on about one thing or another, but I've probably said enough.
Is there anything else you want to say, or just, and you're encouraging folks to seek out your book, I'm sure, and
Yeah, please seek out my book. It's you can get it directly from the publisher. Their website is apartamentomagazine.com. You can see videos of the book, or some of the pages on my Instagram, which is at Hamburger Vampire. And the book is in stores across the United States and around the world. You can't miss it. It's got a fluorescent orange screen print on the cover and a bright pink vinyl jacket. And it's 380 pages,
which is actually the norm for a lot of graphic novels.
Is it really?
There's plenty of really big books, and it just is what it is.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Zebadiah.
Henry, thank you for having me, and for the deep end questions. Taking the time to talk about the book with me.
You bet.